The fortress Europe, as Europe rearms and prepares for a future of permanent confrontation with Russia, with China, with Iran, and other perceived adversaries, dissent at home across Europe and the UK is increasingly coming under attack. And the latest example came when, as many of you saw, the UK government banned Cenk Uygur and Hasan Piker from entering the country ahead of speaking engagements, claiming that their presence was not, quote, conducive to the public good. Oh, sounds so like Orwellian. This decision comes amidst a much broader crackdown on journalists, activists, and specifically anti-genocide voices across Britain and Europe. What does this tell us about the state of democracy in the West? Nothing good.
Nothing good.
And why does repression seem to be accelerating alongside militarization? Joining us to discuss all of this is investigative journalist Matt Kennard, who is the co-founder of Declassified UK and author of Irregular Army. Matt, it is a pleasure to have you on Breakthrough Live.
It's great to be here. Congrats on the new show.
Thank you so much. And we're so lucky to get you on because you are constantly following this stuff. I want to start with asking you about the headline I mentioned in the intro about the banning of Cenk Uygur and Hasan Piker from entering the country, denying their visas, like they revoked their visas ahead of these speaking engagements. These aren't accused terrorists. They're not violent extremists. They're journalists and political commentators, and quite popular ones, by the way. So how is this part of a broader trend in the UK and in Europe to silence opposition to complicity in US and Israeli war crimes?
Well, it follows a pattern which has been put down for 2 years now. But this is, like, as you mentioned, this did shock me because usually the UK government has gone after kind of more marginal figures or journalists that work more in alternative media. I know Cenk and Hasan work in alternative media, but they're very popular. Like, for example, in October 2024, Asa Winstanley, who I think you guys will know, he's a very good journalist at Electronic Intifada, he had his house raided by the police. All his electronics taken, and he wasn't even charged with a crime. Which I didn't even know could happen in the UK. And he asked when he had his house raided, "What have I done?" And they wouldn't tell him. And it was actually eventually ruled unlawful. But so in that context, it's not surprising that this kind of thing is happening. But it is surprising that they've gone for what I think are kind of like made men of the media. I know that they're very good on the genocide, but they're quite mainstream.
Right.
And this is actually what I find quite scary about it is that the threshold for clamping down on this stuff is getting lower and lower, and they're going after more and more people. But essentially, what it is that I don't know how it appears from the outside, but the UK is one of the major places I think that Israel sees a defeat during the genocide. Some of the biggest marches in the world have been in London. The population is really, really against the genocide, increasingly against Israel and against Zionism. And they've lost control of the narrative in a way that they never have, the Zionist lobby, the Israeli assets in the UK. And they're panicking. And if you've lost control of the narrative, the only way you can really clamp down on dissent is to use the law. And they're doing that domestically. And now they're just straight up not allowing people who criticize Israel into the UK. So it's crazy. Things that we never thought would happen are happening now. And who knows where it ends. But the important point to say is it also shows the control that the Israel lobby has over the UK government. Because this is not criticism of the UK or its government or any part of the UK state. This is criticism of Israel, which is a foreign country 3,000 miles away. Why is our government banning people who criticize that government? You can say things in the UK now about our own government, which you can't say about Israel. How have we got to that situation?
That's actually wild. Sorry.
And it does go to the fact that the Israel lobby has built up and got more sophisticated and more powerful over the last 30 to 40 years, or maybe even more recently, 20 years. And actually, if you look at why the UK government did it, a lot of these Israel lobby groups were pushing for Hasan and Cenk to be banned before it
Mm.
happened. And it's undoubtedly the UK government responded to that pressure from Israel lobby groups. And the interesting thing about the Israel lobby in the UK, and I think this applies actually across the Western world, is that some of these groups explicitly have Israel in their title, like AIPAC or Labour Friends of Israel, but many of them just call themselves Jewish communal groups.
Right.
Which is they should be doing the job of representing Jewish British people or American Jewish people, but they're weaponized and turned into Israel lobby groups. So but it is a crazy situation, and also the reaction, of the group that they were meant to speak at South by Southwest London. That was shocking.
Right.
That this is like it is a very mainstream and corporate event, but they put out a statement basically. They refused to even criticize it in a slight way. The fact that they've been banned, they said this is a decision for the Home Office, nothing to do with us. And in fact, Oxford Union did a much stronger statement, which is what they should have done, and they said we'll put it on anyway via video link, which is obviously what any respectable institution would do. But South by Southwest London actually is an interesting organisation. Last year, they had an unscheduled talk by Tony Blair, who everyone will know, like international war criminal and just devil himself. But that was leaked to me by someone inside South by Southwest London that he was going to speak, and I published it, and loads of artists pulled out as a response.
Well,
so
good for
it's
them.
kind of good for them, and it's happened again. I think Dropsite pulled out of their event at South by Southwest London. Ash Sarkar, the journalist here, pulled out. So, which is what people should do, right? Because if we don't show solidarity with people who are victimized for speaking out against genocide and speaking out against Israel, then it's much, much easier for the repressive forces to get their way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned some of these examples, but the ban on, Cenk and Hasan was not even perhaps the most drastic of the acts of repression against the Palestine movement in the UK. I mean, again, the raid of Eza Winstanley's home, just the complete banning, prescription of Palestine action, jailing of their activists, the arrest of hundreds of people for simply holding a sign that says, I support Palestine action. I mean, if we pause for a second, it's like, it becomes normal, these kind of things where it's like, oh yeah, right, now I can't go outside and hold the Palestine action sign. But like in reality, like this is crazy. And especially under a Labour government, under Keir Starmer, a party, again, I mean, it's obvious that Labour is far from what it was, but this is a party that was meant to represent the working class, and the working class in the UK seems to not have any rights whatsoever to free speech, to free assembly. I mean, what do you, I mean, I know you're saying it's to really, the Israel lobby has played such a big role in this, but what does this say about state repression against other movements in the UK, the ability to even have rights? What are we looking at here?
Well, it's important for Americans to understand we don't have a codified constitution. So actually, we have a lot less protections than you. We don't have a First Amendment. I mean, I know Trump doesn't really care about the Constitution, but at least it's there in theory. We don't even have that. So it's all common law and different bits of legislation, which is kind of cobbled together. So we have much less protection. But it is hugely worrying. And as you say, like these tools that are given the powerful forces use and take and invent for themselves, they don't then put them away once they've got rid of organizations that they like. They're used against everyone. And so it started with Palestine Action, but I'm sure it'll be used against other non-direct action groups like Greenpeace, for example. There's often talk about that. But the Palestine Action ban is again completely wild, and as you say, it's kind of unbelievable, because the people were holding up signs saying I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action, and getting arrested. You're talking about like old grannies and disabled people. Over 3,000 were arrested, and then there's some clips of people on those things going up to police officers and saying I support genocide. And the police was like, "That's fine." So it's fine to say that. Yeah, exactly. But it is shocking to people outside that this is the Labour government doing this. But it's also important for people to understand that of all the mainstream parties in the UK, probably Labour is the most captured by the Israel lobby, because they've gone the hardest on labor, because that's the real risk. And it's the same with the CIA, by the way. On the work I've done about CIA operations in the UK, they were always much more worried about making sure the Labour Party didn't come towards an anti-imperialist position, or and we saw that with Jeremy Corbyn as well. So and look, the contradictions are just so obvious and disgusting. In July 2025, the Labour government gave special mission immunity to Tomer Bar, who's the head of the Israeli Air Force, so one of the key architects of the genocide, to come to the UK. Then a few months later, Starmer invited Isaac Herzog, who is the president of Israel, who's actually was mentioned in the ICJ for genocidal case for genocidal language. So the government has created the conditions where genocidaires are welcome, and will give them special mission immunity so that they can't be arrested. Whereas people like Cenk, Uygur and Hasan Piker, who are just mainstream critics of Israel, just talking about the genocide, are banned. So you know, it's very, very scary in this country, not just because of what's happening now, but also because of the prospect of what's coming next. Right. Here in the UK, for people who know about it, we're very, very close to having a reform government. And reform, for people who don't know, is the far right party. They're kind of the Trump party. And when they come into power, they will use all these precedents to go even harder. And just to give you a personal example, there was a former senior UK military official who was calling for like a year every day on Twitter for me to be arrested and put in prison. And I didn't respond because I get a lot of that stuff. But then he was put up by Reform to be a mayoral candidate. So then I said something about it, and he actually stopped when it got covered by some media. But the point is, someone like that could be defense secretary in a Reform government. So it's very, like, the things we have assumed are rights that we have, they don't really exist, and they're very, very easy to dismantle. And I should say, look, this does come in the context of like Julian Assange being put in Belmarsh maximum security prison for 5 years, merely for exposing war crimes, and that was done at the behest of another lobby, which is the American lobby and American control of our government, which is maybe even more severe than Israeli. To be honest, our foreign policy is completely written in Washington. But if you can do that and get away with it, and civil society is absent, the media don't cover it. There was not a single campaign, even by like the Guardian, who benefited from all his releases. Then you just realize that the public square, our rights are not defended by all the institutions we're told should defend them. So we're kind of isolated. But I think that it's good that there's been such outpouring of disgust at what's happened to Hasan and Cenk. But people need to understand that this worse stuff has happened to journalists before in the previous year or so. In the case of Asa Winstanley, for example, it wasn't covered once by a mainstream newspaper. Not a single word. So an independent journalist, dissident journalist, who is raided by the police, not charged with the crime, all his stuff is taken. It's then ruled unlawful, and not a single UK newspaper has ever written a word about it. It's like Orwellian, you know. It's like into the memory hole. If it's not conducive to the state narrative, or it's a journalist who's opposing Israel or genocide, it never happened. So quite scary.
Yeah, it's really that style of omission is just as much propaganda as libeling someone. I wanted to ask you, just to pivot a little bit here, because this is something you cover quite closely. You know, this repression is taking place while the UK is playing quite an important and active role in logistically aiding the US-Israeli wars across the region. You've talked a lot about the UK base in Cyprus, which has been this key launching pad for intelligence operations and more, especially with regard to Gaza, probably also with Lebanon. Yet the government still claims that it's not really involved in these wars. So can you explain to our audience the extent of British involvement in the genocide in Gaza, the US-Israeli war on Iran, and the ongoing war against the people of Lebanon?
Yeah, so on the Gaza genocide, we were a key player. In terms of intelligence, we led. And that's not known by many people, because only a few alternative media journalists were even covering it, which again is incredible, right? Because if you're participating in a genocide, that's no worse crime that a government can be involved in. So you think that of the thousands of journalists in the UK, one of them might, in the mainstream, might have been a bit interested, but no, zero. But there's a couple of elements to it. The main one that I covered and exposed really was the daily intelligence flights that we were sending over Gaza, which we didn't know for a long time where that information was going within Israel, because the government wouldn't tell us. They said it's only going to relevant authorities. But last year it was revealed that that information was going to the Israeli military, and not only to the Israeli military in real time. So when the plane was in the sky, this information, and these were flights that were going over Gaza for 6 hours for pretty much the whole of the genocide. And Al Jazeera did an investigation on the back of some of the work we were doing, and found that nearly half of all intelligence flights flown over Gaza during the genocide were by the RAF, the UK Air Force. So that's like double Israel itself. So a huge outsized role. And again, why are we involved? It's nothing to do with us. And it's merely because it's important for people to understand that we have an establishment that ruled the world for 200 years and really wants to hold on to the pretense that they have this global influence and this global role and can take part in imperial crimes. It really is as much as that, because I don't even think Israel needed it. But but another point was that Cyprus, we have this huge airbase there, which we retained when Cyprus got independence from Britain in 1960. We retained a huge airbase, and we also retained a huge intelligence station in the east of the island. Both of those are unofficially joint US-UK bases as well. So, and RAF Akrotiri, which is the airbase, became the central and key international site for the military build-up for getting weapons to Israel, for flying these intelligence flights. And we don't know about the spying that was done from Cyprus by the Americans and Brits for the Israelis, but I'm sure that was at industrial levels as well. So the UK is not, because even on the left here, we have this idea that people who are critics of the UK role, they say the UK was complicit. We weren't complicit, we were participants. If you're gathering intelligence for 6 hours a day and handing it to a genocidal military, which is committing hourly or minute by minute war crimes, you can't then say, well, we're not involved. You are a participant, because that intelligence is undoubtedly being used to target and kill kids and other civilians. So, and then on the Iran thing, again, shows the same dynamics, right? So the UK role it has been presented in the media, funnily enough, as Keir Starmer standing up to Trump, because UK didn't join the strikes itself. But the timeline is interesting. So originally, Keir Starmer said that the US can't use UK bases to bomb Iran. He then reversed course and said US can use bases, and they've used RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, which is the US's only forward operating location in Europe. So you can get heavy bombers that go from there. And actually images came out of bombs being loaded onto it, which caused quite a scene. But also Diego Garcia, which is the huge UK-US joint base in the Indian Ocean, that was used to bomb Iran. And that's, so we're participants again by international law. The Hague Convention, which is one of the key parts of the international law, says if you allow weapons to be taken across your territory and loaded onto planes that are going to be used to bomb places, then your claim to neutrality evaporates. So we can't claim to be neutral if we're allowing that stuff to happen. But again, that's been presented in the UK press as like, oh, this is Keir Starmer's greatest moment. He stood up to Trump, but it's not true at all. So yeah, I mean, and you see this again and again and again from all imperial conflicts and imperial crimes that are primarily done by Israel and the US now. Britain always plays a role. And that goes, Rania, you know a lot about the dirty war in Syria. The MI6 had a huge role, and the UK government had a huge role, including getting weapons from Libya to rebels in Syria, which came out in that Seymour Hersh article in the LRB. So yeah, we're deeply embedded, and again, this is a bipartisan thing. It doesn't matter if it's the Tories or Labour in Number 10. The same shit happens. This is kind of an area of the state that you can't look at, and we're not allowed to look at, and most people don't even know about it. I'll just finish with this as well. We got SAS, which is the special forces. In the last 10 years, they've fought 7 secret wars that no one in the UK even knows about. So from Somalia to Syria to Iraq. And then, sorry, I'll finish with Lebanon because you mentioned Lebanon as well. So I found that a protector drone, which is a weaponized drone, went from Cyprus over Lebanon at the time and was circling at the time of the April 8th massacre when they dropped.
I take that especially personally because I was there that day and it was the most terrifying day of my life.
They dropped they hit 100 targets in 10 minutes or something, and it was
160 bombs in 10 minutes. Yep.
Exactly, and I don't know. It was over 300 people died, but that sounds like a conservative estimate. But anyway, there was one attack in Baalbek which killed 118 people, and this drone was circling just around Baalbek.
Interesting.
So, and
okay.
Again, I published that on Twitter, which is the way I get out information these days. But not a single mainstream media outlet picked that up. It was picked up by Middle East Eye and Novara Media, but nothing mainstream. Again, you would think maybe in the context of this Spy for Israel program, which we ran for 2 years over Gaza, they might be interested that we happened to have a drone in the sky when Lebanon was getting smashed up by the Israelis. But nothing. So they're complicit. I think those journalists are complicit because 100%. if they expose this, or at least not even expose it, if they just covered it when it was exposed, then pressure would build on the government to stop these imperial crimes and stop being involved in all this savagery around the world.
Well, that's a good reminder to everyone who's watching right now to follow Matt Kennard on Twitter, because truly you are doing such incredible and groundbreaking work. I mean, again, revealing the UK participation, not even complicity, I think is so important. But we're not letting you go yet because we've one more question for you. Just pulling back a little bit from the UK, we know that the pattern seen in the UK of repression of free speech, arrest of activists, banning of activist groups is not limited to the UK. And in Germany, I mean, we could say it's even worse. You can't say from the river to the sea, you will get arrested. Numerous pro-Palestine groups have been banned. There's, week after week, clips of the police just brutalizing anyone who goes out to a Palestine protest. People have lost their jobs for merely, expressing disgust with the genocide. So, and this is all taking place as Europe is launching this very ambitious Rearm Europe plan. Like, we must militarize. We are going to meet the NATO threshold of 5%, not even 2%, but we want to spend 5% of our GDP buying more weapons, being ready for the enemy of Russia and China. So, I mean, what do you make of this? It does seem in a lot of ways that Palestine is kind of a test case for Europe to just begin mass repression and crackdown on anyone that is dissenting in any way to this militarization plan and Europe's participation in crimes abroad currently. But what does it really portend for the future?
Yeah, well, I think that I don't think it's overblown to say that we are very much at risk of fascism. And, we had fascism in the most brutal fashion in this continent with the Nazis and Mussolini. And many of the kind of descendants of them are gaining power across the continent, including in the UK. I mentioned Reform. And then there's Tommy Robinson, who's not part of Reform, but is a fascist, street fascist, and he has massive marches now. So it's hugely worrying. And that's what I'm saying is like the liberal class is implicated in all this. And in fact, is the reason that it's happened. They're hollowing out our freedoms. They're hollowing out the kind of social protections we have to fight these imperial wars. Like you mentioned, the Ukraine. So we've given billions we're second to the United States. We've given billions, including Starmer's promise for 100 years or something ridiculous, arms to Ukraine. Meanwhile, they've slashed payments to disabled people. So what the disabled people have come under the biggest attack they've possibly ever come under a Labour government. So we're literally shifting money into the pockets of arms companies and making and actually probably killing disabled people. So what Lenin called social murder. So and I think that is a part of the same trend, And the center has congealed, so there's no debate within the mainstream parties about these issues like Ukraine or the genocide in Gaza, for example. The Labour, Tories, and Reform all extremely pro-Israel, and they vie with each other to who can be the most pro-Israel. And the only party that's not like that is the Green Party, and then the Green Party luckily has a new charismatic leader who is actually putting forward radical policies, which is vital, because there's a lot, as we mentioned, there's a lot of disgust and upset about the way things are going, but there hasn't been a vehicle for a long time for people to go, and Zach Polanski has made the Green Party that vehicle, so it's very, very important. But we know from history that the establishment, the financial elites will always choose fascism over socialism, and that's what you're seeing. I actually think that in the case of the UK, the best thing for the establishment would have been for them to actually have Jeremy Corbyn become prime minister, because his program was a mild social democrat program. It was like Bernie Sanders style. It wasn't radical, but it would have actually solved some of the problems and some of the unrest, and allowed the liberal system to tick along for a bit longer. But they smashed him to pieces, and then they opened the door for people like Farage and Tommy Robinson. So yeah, I think my personal take is it's super, super dangerous. And I mean, you guys in the States, you have the Trump, I don't think it's outrageous to say he's a fascist, or at least his movement is fascistic, and his actions are. And we're at an unprecedented stage where they're using the US military in a much more I mean, they've always done awful things, but it's much more blatant now. I mean, in some ways I respect that. That's one of the few things I respect about Trump, is that when he goes into Venezuela and he kidnaps the president, like previous presidents, even Republican and Democrat, would have niced it up and used legalistic language to cover up state terrorism, whereas he's just like, oh, we're going in, we're going to take all the oil, our companies are going to get really rich, and this is how much oil is already on its way to the United States. So, but it's like mask off time. And obviously, in the case of Trump, he is the head of the most powerful country in history. So, when you have someone like that and a movement that put him into power, that when you talk about that kind of power, it's hugely worrying for everyone in the world. And Europe is going the same way. And the only way we really fight back is to have a real alternative, and not allow it to be smashed by the establishment. But the establishment here, establishment in the United States, the establishment in Europe, they're like absolute veterans at smashing any kind of independent anti-imperialist movement on the left. So it's quite hard to build one. I mean, we've never, apart from Tsipras in Greece, post-Second World War, we've not had a radical left government in any European country, which is quite amazing. And of course, that's not just as coincidence. That's the residue of the Truman Doctrine, and the fact that the CIA and other intelligence agencies have been all over the continent, making sure that independent anti-imperialist left can never get anywhere in terms of the democratic system.
You on so we can remind people of that really not very well-known history. It's not so much history actually still happening. Matt Kennard, thank you so much for joining us to break all this down. Really excited to get you on this program and hope to have you back on soon.
Yeah, and congrats. It's very important. Like we're alternative media is the reason that things are changing, I think, at the societal level, maybe not on the establishment level, but so it's super exciting that you've got your new show, and hopefully there'll be other stuff like that happening across the US and the UK.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Matt.